Yeah, we're going to dive into some of the details around the breath and some experiential um, observation of our breath and how we can use it to change our state. Welcome, Sweta. Let me know if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. I'm glad to have you all here for the biochemistry of breath. And I think you are all familiar with Yole, but in case you don't know Yole, Yole is a corporate learning and well-being company based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and Yole will be turning 10 this year. Our mission is to elevate compassion, connection, and collaboration through holistic well-being and human-centered leadership. And it's so wonderful to share with you today. My name is Michelle Bouvier, and I'm a facilitator and experience lead at Yole, and also an interdisciplinary embodiment educator, the founder of the Kutila School of Embodied Resilience, where I'm passionate about sharing the modern science around tools of body, breath, and brain for personal and collective resilience and well-being. And we're going to talk about the breath today because breath work is really in the zeitgeist. It's getting more and more popular. Our breath is always with us. It can be one of the lowest hanging fruit tools to change our mental state, emotional state, physiological state, nervous system state in the moment and over time. And so I wanted to start with just a little observation. With your eyes open or closed as you like, just bring your attention to your breath. And this is an intentionally very open invitation to see what you notice first. Do you notice what's happening in your nostrils or your throat,
I feel it in my chest expanding and
in your
contracting.
chest, or other places? The belly, the ribs. Is your mind still on your breath? Did it go somewhere else? Just take.
Michelle, my mind quiets. My mind quiets when I begin breathing intentionally like this.
Beautiful. Let's have 3 more breaths as if everything you needed to know is happening in the breath. And notice wherever your mind goes on that wave of in and out. And then on the next round, breathe really slow and a thin stream of air through your nose until you can fill almost like a balloon from your belly to your ribs to your chest. Hold it gently and then exhale with a hiss, a very long exhale. Every last drop. For 2 more of those. Slow breath in through your nose, through the whole inner body. And then pause, relaxed as much as possible. And when you need to empty, a long hiss. One more of those on your own. And then just let yourself return to natural breath. such a blessing. We don't have to think of it to have the breath flowing. And I'm curious if you felt any difference, if you feel any difference right now than 5 minutes ago. Feel free to share on the chat or just speak it out because we are a more intimate group than we expected. So it'd be nice to hear. You might feel a little more landed or not. We're all different. There's no one ingredient or recipe all the time that works for every person.
I think it helps just to slow everything down. Just
Mm.
everything down.
Anyone else feel that way? It was brief, right? 3 rounds.
Yeah.
When we elongate the exhale and when we slow down the breath, we have a cascading effect through the whole of our physiology and nervous system. We're going to look a little bit more at that, the quiet place. Beautiful. So I'm going to share a little presentation, and I want to make sure that everyone can see this well. So we see Biochemistry of Breath, February 9th, today. And breath has been something really particularly interesting to me. I have taught yoga and movement for 25 years, and there's a lot of things out there that talk about the benefits of breath work and breathing without really understanding the mechanisms. And so I was inspired to share more of the mechanisms of our physiology. And this is just a start today, but I hope that it will be valuable to you. Um, Dr. Rosalba Courtney wrote a really amazing book on the science of pranayama and this idea that breathing is the conductor of the homeostatic orchestra of the whole body. It is the link between our bodily systems, between our conscious and our subconscious. Our breathing rate is comes from the state of our metabolic need, and yet we have conscious control over our breath rate, which can have an effect on all of the physiological systems that we wouldn't otherwise have direct conscious control over. At least most of us. Maybe the monks in Tibet have more skills on this level. It's the link between our body and mind. We could say that the way we think impacts our breath, the way we move, the way we hold ourselves. And there's a two-way street with how we feel internally. And most importantly is its effect on the nervous system as a gateway for how we transform stress, how we're able to show up in regulation with each other, how we're able to have energy and focus and leadership. Breathing drives every organ system in the body. Respiration, the oxygen chemical exchange, is many different things. We're going to talk about the biochemistry most today, but it's also biomechanical as far as our shape and the pressure and what that does to our overall architecture, as well as psychosocial, how we feel with others, how we impact others when we pick up on the subconscious cues of each other. Breathing is individual because we are all in a different state of digestion, sleep, posture, exercise, emotional state. So it's a reflection and a tool for our behavior. But respiration, the underlying oxygen exchange, is of course universal. I have a little Zoom delay here for my slides. And ideally, breathing is very free. Free in the space of our body, free in the timing, not forced, not efforted, not blocked or shallow. And when there is this homeostatic balance, we can return to balance. We can find the adaptable solutions inside and out, and we can perform at our best. There's a direct, very intimate link between our respiratory rate and our heart rate. We're going to experience that a little bit later. And also just to clue in to the somatic signals that we might feel even before our mind can acknowledge when the pressure is on or when we're facing anxiety or nerves. What are the somatic cues that we can get of maybe feeling our heart racing or maybe feeling the breath going fast, or sometimes, again, varies for all of us, the temperature in our skin. When we tune into our links for ourselves, how different ways of breathing impact us, we can get those signals and then apply the tools in the moment in the most effective way for us. So some of the functions of the breath, and I'd be curious if you could think of any others to add them to the chat as I just walk us through these. Some of these are very obvious, but we're going to dig under the hood a little bit. So biochemical, breathing brings oxygen to the cells. So important. Oxygen is the fuel for cellular metabolism, wherever that cell may be, in your muscles, in your liver, in your bones. Whatever the cell is doing its main job, it needs oxygen as its fuel. One of these biochemical relationships is the balance between oxygen and carbon dioxide. Is anyone here familiar with the Bohr effect in respiration? Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. We're going right in. In the worlds that I am in the yoga and movement worlds, breath work is blowing up, maybe in your worlds as well. And there is this assumption that more oxygen is better. And there's a lot of reasons why that is kind of in the background of our minds, at least speaking for myself. And when I learned about the Bohr effect, completely changed my understanding. Usually we think of breathing more as better, but the oxygen coming in through our nose into our lungs, into the alveoli, jumps onto a hemoglobin molecule. And the heme group, which is based around the element iron, has 4 chemical bonds for each heme group that can connect to 4 oxygen molecules. And those bonds are extremely strong. And I think of it as a little bus, that the hemoglobin bus comes along and picks up some oxygen to go deliver the oxygen where it needs to go. But the seatbelts are really, really tight. And the oxygen doesn't get off of the hemoglobin, off the bus, unless there is enough carbon dioxide in the blood to push it off the bus. So if we're breathing a lot, whether that is too fast or too much volume of breath, and our oxygen is really high, it will be measured in our blood, but it won't actually get to its final destination. And I find this interesting. The idea that carbon dioxide is a waste came out of the beginnings of medicine under the power of the church. And this idea of this purity of good and bad, and measuring carbon dioxide coming out must be a bad thing. But in fact, carbon dioxide is involved in more chemical reactions in our physiology than oxygen, something like 25 or 26. Although oxygen is absolutely fundamental for the functioning of every cell, carbon dioxide is involved in many other chemical processes. So it's really about the balance and the rate and the quality and how we're breathing that keeps this at an optimal level. The level of our carbon dioxide is also the main driver of pH in the body, so that our pH is part of what drives the rate of respiration through the cerebral spinal fluid, through the blood-brain barrier into our brain itself, into the central nervous system. The breath is also very affected by our shape, our posture, our movement capacity, the tissue flexibility or stiffness. The movement itself, the physical force, is a pump for the fluid dynamics of the body. CSF is cerebral spinal fluid. It is key to our spinal support, our core integrity and support, and our motor control through the center of the body, how forces move in a vertical and through the upper and lower body. And it is key in our literal physical posture and our mental emotional posture. And of course, we need to breathe to speak, to sing, to vocalize. And breath is, again, a two-way street for keeping our upper airway, sinuses, and nasal health at an optimal level. And it's key as that link between the subconscious and the conscious to our self-regulation and our mindfulness. It's one of the always available things for us to become present because the breath is always with us. And we'll often hear, take a deep breath in times of stress or challenge, or maybe just feeling rushed or overwhelmed. And so we're going to look at if that is always a good suggestion. Now, if we say take a deep breath, we bring our awareness to the breath. Just bringing your awareness to the breath helps to regulate your nervous system. That's the first key to take with you, just that. When we take a deep breath, we expand the diaphragm, which has a signal taken up by the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve takes that signal of the movement of the diaphragm as a regulation response, a down calming response. But the amount of air, if we breathe too much too fast, can actually cause problems. So one deep breath is probably wonderful. Many forced deep breaths can actually take us out of balance. Some of the dysfunctions that are all too common are this forced breathing to start. This could be an artificial speeding up of the breath. Anything where we feel like we kind of have to use muscle to push the breath. The breath happens because of a pressure differential. The shape of our lungs expands like an accordion that is a lesser pressure where the air is pushed in from the atmosphere. And all of that is happening on an automatic level from our diaphragm. When we talk about diaphragmatic breathing, truly, there is no breathing that's not diaphragmatic. However, we too often can get stuck in breathing in the chest, breathing with extra muscles, often called accessory muscles, that are less efficient, can also cause this over breathing that we're going to talk about in the next slide as well. And they're there when we really need it. If we're running upstairs and we need to get that extra oxygen for the metabolic need, then they're helpful. But we can get stuck in those patterns for various reasons about our ergonomics and our stress and our emotions as well. Also, breathing through the mouth brings in more air than we need. Breathing through the nose is designed to take in breath in the right amounts. Of course, it's wonderful to have a second option when we need it. But overall, we want to breathe through our nose as much as possible. Interestingly, the nose has structures called turbinates that are kind of like little conch shells that spin the air, and the spin takes the air deeper down the tiny ends of the alveoli for more surface area and gas exchange than actually breathing through your mouth and getting more air in. Our posture, kind of mentioned this a few times. Ideally, we want to have the freedom of breath in the place and space, but also in our timing. So just something to be aware of for now. And of course, our breath is linked to our emotional state. When we are in a state of stress, we will tend to breathe more because the stress response feels like we need to gear up to fight the tiger, right? Or to run. And so we're preparing for this action. The tricky thing in our world is that most of our stress doesn't require that metabolic action, which leads us to an idea of what's called chronic hyperventilation. Has anyone heard of this? Has anyone heard of Buteyko breathing, Dr. Buteyko? Okay, so Dr. Buteyko was, I believe, Romanian doctor, no longer with us, decades ago, who started to look at soldiers in the 30s. And in the early 1900s, there was this effect that they saw in soldiers that their entire system just was functioning suboptimally, sometimes, having major problems, and sometimes just not at their peak. And these are young soldiers. And there's a syndrome without a cause called effort syndrome or soldier's heart. And in 1938, it was called hyperventilation syndrome, mostly by the work of Dr. Buteyko. And in 1938, it was shown that it can be induced by overbreathing. But the trick is it's still very fringe in medicine because of the specialization in medicine, which has so much benefit. But we're seeing in so much of the research around the body, mind, the nervous system, even pain science, that the interweaving of our systems, the systems thinking, is really where we have been missing some of these key points. And this is one. Because of this need for oxygen in every single cell, if a cell does not have oxygen, wherever it is, it's not going to be performing its job. If we overbreathe and we have a higher ratio of oxygen in the blood than carbon dioxide, the oxygen is not going to get off the bus. And this leads to hypoxia, low oxygen in the cells, an overall exhaustion, pain, weakness, to alkalosis, the lactic acid buildup, more than just, after a workout. Maybe if it lasts too long, or if you feel that soreness, it doesn't really go away. It constricts our smooth muscle. So the muscles that are not our skeletal muscles, of the heart, of the diaphragm. It can cause spasms in this muscle. So depending where we find this, in the bronchioles, this is related to asthma. In the blood vessels, it can be hypertension and ischemia or low blood reaching the muscles. In digestion, this could be things like irritable bowel syndrome. So we can see how there's so many different systems involved. It might be hard to catch this if it is happening. It can initiate chemical cascades of higher lipids and sugars in the blood, disrupt our mineral balance, calcium homeostasis. It can result in really diverse symptoms that transcend individual specialties in medicine, which is why it was so hard to catch and is still a little bit fringe, although it is definitely growing in understanding. And the tricky part here is that if we have chronic low levels of stress that build up, we can be in a state of chronic hyperventilation and not really know it. Our set point of what the ratio is easier to get set to a lower CO2 level, carbon dioxide to oxygen, than to the higher CO2 level. And so if our set point in our central nervous system gets used to chronic hyperventilation, we can get too used to this lower level of functioning. And it will tend to show up wherever we have a weak link within our genetic predisposition. And it's really this two-way street, the chicken or the egg with our nervous system. I don't want anyone to worry about it too much, though. So I'm going to teach you a little mudra that really helps. Take your right hand to your forehead and just say, don't worry about it. Because the good news is you're going to have tools to steer away from this chronic hyperventilation. Just a little review for probably some of us of our one model of the nervous system is this binary of the fight or flight and rest and digest nervous system. And just to look briefly here and see that the only place we have conscious control is through our breathing, unless you have some powers that I don't know about in the rest of these effects of our activation and our deactivation. If we have internal stressors that we are not aware of on the biochemical level, we have sort of a bucket of what we can handle. And then life is stressful enough. We'll have a much lower threshold for our ability to show up in leadership and to show up in kindness and communication and love with each other in whatever is in front of you in your life. And then we can get locked into a vicious cycle of this compounding stress. But if we have ways to discharge both the internal stressors as well as recognize often in the somatic cues when the stress is happening outside and interrupt the pattern in the moment, we can start to drain the bucket. We can start to increase our capacity over the long term. Has anyone here heard of polyvagal theory? Okay. That can be a much longer conversation. We're just going to briefly mention that the binary model of the nervous system is still true, but it's not the whole truth. All models are wrong. Some are helpful, some are more helpful. And a new model that is also helpful is called polyvagal theory. It is still a theory because the mechanism has the nerve mechanism of the architecture has some questions out there if you do go looking this up. But the map of what it adds to our previous model is really helpful. And what that is that we have activation and deactivation, and we want to be able to move between the two. We don't want to get stuck at either one, but it's not a positive and negative. It's not that deactivation is always good and fight or flight is the only way we activate. That we have this positive sense of regulation and safety and connection that can be activated in competition and meeting challenges and play. And if we are in a state of overdrive and our bucket is too full, then that activation will go more into fear and anxiety and fight or flight. And the same with the deactivation in the connection and regulation and safety. This is more of a place of intimacy and relaxation and cuddling, all so important. And without that safety, we can find getting stuck in that deactivation of freeze and flop and trauma. And what can happen is if we're stuck in the fight or flight for too long, we sort of fry our system, almost like frying the electrical grid, and we can get stuck down below. And so we want to be able to move through up and down. And the more we kind of do that consciously, the more we expand our range. We expand that window of tolerance of what we are capable of staying centered within. And some of the ways to get either out of the upper or the lower part of this ladder to the regulation and to help others is through social connection and breath. So if you need to ever, this is a little bit away from the breath, just looking in someone's eyes. This is why I love the vision and mission of Yole, is human-centered, is one of the most powerful ways to call us back in. And then one of the next most powerful ways is to become aware of how you can use your breath in that moment, whether it's to calm from an overactivated state or activate from a lower activated state. So we're going to try a few of these breaths. So there is one of the fastest ways to deactivate, to blow off some steam, we could say, is called the physiological sigh. And it's a long nasal inhale with a little pause, followed by another bit of inhale with no empty, a tiny pause, and then empty through your mouth. And you can do this, 3 or 4 times at one round. And even, in a moment, that can help us drop our state. You can also do this for a period of a few minutes. There's been a study through the Stanford School of Medicine, a clinical trial about practicing this for 5 minutes daily, did result in overall stress reduction and relaxation and resting heart rate improvements. So let's just try this. I know we're not really in a super activated state yet, but let's try this so we have this in our bodies. I'll demonstrate, we can do it together, but feel free to watch as well as go along. It goes like this. And you could even change the pace a little bit depending on your own body and what feels good. Let's try 3. All the way empty. You might notice as you return to your natural breath, often there's a pause without breathing there. And that's usually because you don't need the oxygen. So the physiological sigh, you can pluck out of your pocket, your memory, in the moment. And if you feel inspired, try this a few minutes a day and see how you feel in a week. What we started with today, also with the long exhales, it has a similar effect if you need that immediate dropping down. If we want to increase our alertness and our focus, we can use what's called controlled hyperventilation. And a lot of the what's out in the wild under the term of breathwork is actually enforced hyperventilation. There is a range of skill level of leaders who are sharing this. And the ones who are will tell you that it can cause discomfort. We're not going to do it very long, but in a lot of the mainstream breath work that is out there, there's enforced hyperventilation for maybe 30 minutes. And it really kind of pokes the tiger of your nervous system to let the nervous system let go. And it's not necessarily safe for everyone all the time. So I would recommend, if you're interested in that, really vet the leaders. In a short bout, which is what we're going to do, this is similar to what is popularized by Wim Hof, if you have heard of Wim Hof. This can increase adrenaline in the brain very quickly. And we might just warn you, if it does feel just uncomfortable, just stop. But it might feel a little bit uncomfortable. And a few minutes after, as things settle, you will have that adrenaline to channel into your alertness and your capacity to focus. So if you need to kind of get that extra juice, this can be helpful. The pace is personal. I would just find something that feels a little bit efforted, but not too strained. So we're going to go for maybe 20 to 30, 25, you could say. And then we're going to empty the breath and we're going to hold as long as it's comfortable. Really, as long as it's comfortable would be the recommendation. And it's generally taught with about 15 to 30 seconds. So I'll start, I'll sort of count. You come along. The count's not the most important part. You can breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Keep going. Your pace doesn't have to match mine. Almost there. All the way. And then stay empty, relaxed, as long as it's comfortable. And then let your breath return very soft. Similar to the physiological side, you could do this once and feel an effect. You could do it for a period of a few minutes. Definitely holding the breath at the end empty will help to keep the oxygen and carbon dioxide balance from going askew, because we're kind of hacking the nervous system using the conscious control to stimulate that activation, but we don't want to impact the carbon dioxide oxygen ratio too much if we can help it. I would just put a little caveat to use caution. If you tend to have high anxiety, you might not need this. And don't do this while you're driving or operating heavy machinery. If you practice this over time, it stretches our stress threshold a little tiny bit. So over time, it can lead to being able to be within stressful situations with a greater calm as well. So I'm curious if you feel the difference between those two. And feel free to add your experience in the chat or jump on, since there's a few of us. If you felt you liked one more than the other at this point today on Friday, February 9th at lunch, because our energy level morning, noon, and night is also different. So just take note that that could change. Did you guys feel a difference? It was a short experiment as well. You know, doing a few rounds would be probably something to play with on your own. There's one more that I would like to share with you, and this is one way to shift our oxygen carbon dioxide balance to increase carbon dioxide tolerance. So overall, less is more in our breathing. The minimum breath for our metabolic need will help us run like a fine-tuned car, like a really nice, well-running, efficient vehicle of our body-mind. So breathing through your nose overall is part of that. Breathing less is part of that. And there are a few different ways to start to train our comfort and our nervous system to get used to that. And this is one. I call it the Grand Canyon breath. And we're working with what's called the tidal volume of breath. Generally speaking, much like a bell curve, we're actually only moving the air in the middle third of the bell curve. And we're always keeping about a third of the capacity inside of our lungs. And it's good. Otherwise, the pressure could collapse our lungs. That's what happens when there's fluid in the lungs. And we also have a third of our capacity that we don't necessarily use, which is also good when we are running from the tiger up the mountain and we need that extra capacity. So what we're going to do is we're going to exhale to a natural exhale level. And then we're going to stair step and imagine that we can exhale more. We will be able to exhale more. And then we're going to try to breathe underneath the first level of exhalation. If you can continue to stair step down. This can be a very meditative practice. You could spend many more minutes than we are going to spend. We will spend 1 or 2, and I'll talk you through. So this is really internal practice. You want to be comfortable. You're welcome to close your eyes if you'd like. And just notice your breath for 2 or 3 natural rounds and make sure that you're starting pretty relaxed, especially after our last practice. And then when you're ready, empty without pushing extra, just to a natural empty point. And then empty a little more. Take a tiny, shallow breath and try to stay below the first level of empty. And see if your exhales can be a little bigger, but still relaxed, than a very shallow inhale below the original exhale. Now we're going to stay there. Again, if it's uncomfortable, just let yourself have a normal breath and come back. See if you can keep stair stepping down a little bit. Body relaxed is crucial. You more with your throat relaxed, your jaw relaxed, your belly relaxed. When you're ready, let your breath return very, very gently. Jeffrey says this is less relaxing at altitude. There are so many factors involved for sure. Definitely. This is not relaxing to start off with.
No.
It's the long term. Definitely not. This Dr. Buteyko has inspired a whole school around increasing your CO2 tolerance. And there are many different practices to do this. And this reduced breathing is definitely not comfortable at first, but it gets easier. And you can see the effects if you monitor heart rate and heart rate variability over time. One other way to increase this is if you are exercising, to breathe through your nose and challenge yourself to go a little bit into the discomfort of that. So where you're pushing yourself, where you want to breathe through your mouth, just a little bit, and then stop and collect your calming breath first. So that's another place you can do the same thing. Also, just to touch on, There will be more opportunities to dive deeper into the placement of your breath. So whether we're chest breathing, belly breathing, hopefully we're not needing to pay attention, but just to notice if you ever feel that you are up here, that can lead to more of the stress response. And so I made just a little summary about the ways our breath can up and down regulate our nervous system. And remembering that there's no positive or negative to those things, there's no judgment, but we want to be able to have some conscious control. So some of them are pretty clear, slow and fast, lower and higher in the body. The diaphragm, meaning relaxed, and the other muscles that are pushing, the accessory muscles, breathing through the nose versus the mouth. In yoga, the left nostril and the right nostril, which we actually have a natural switch. There's always a switching. It's about 20 minutes or something like that, where each nostril changes its dominance. Something fun to kind of watch. We actually have two different noses. There was an article in, I think, Scientific American about this recently. And also our emotional state of safety or lack of safety. I see some questions in the chat, and we were going to get to those questions in one moment, so I'm going to answer them all together. Ideally, we want to be able to return to balance. The more we can return to balance, the more tools we have, the more efficient and quick and easily we can return to a regulated state. We can help others as well. We can show up for our leadership. And really, the breath is what connects us to life itself. And we're breathing in the exhalation of trees. We can see so much within the patterns of our body and the branching of in our lungs and our circulatory system and the world. And I hope that bringing awareness to your breath will bring you into a little bit of awe and wonder at the power that is behind the breath inside of you. So I wanted to ask if there were any questions, and I'll start with those in the chat. Feel free to add any others, but Sari says, is regular breath in and out of the nose, and these exercises breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. So ideally, we would be breathing through our nose, in and out, inhale and exhale, until we might have a stuffed up nose and we need another option, or we need more breath. However, at elite levels of athletic performance, there's actually training to continue to push ourselves with breathing through the nose. You'll actually have a much more efficient running system and muscle system, action everywhere. If you can continue to breathe through your nose, you will tire out later, although it's hard to train that. It takes some training to get to that. These exercises in through the nose, out through the mouth, the physiological sigh works with the action of a sigh. There's a little bit more of that patterning that speaks to your nervous system, and chronic hyperventilation is to get the air moving through, and more will come out through your mouth. The slowing down your exhale and anything that is a calming, slow breath, I would recommend still staying through your nose. And Jeffrey asks, how would you contrast the forced breathing techniques to mindful breathing? And what are your thoughts about doing mindful breathing with a partner? I think with a partner would be so lovely. There's so much in that co-regulation that helps us get back to normal breathing patterns as well. Contrast forced breathing to mindful breathing. I think that mindful breathing is a very big umbrella, right? If we're just bringing any presence to the breath. And forced breathing, in the way I use those words, is anything that feels like a push or takes effort. Sometimes in that hyperventilation, we consciously did that so that we could hack, right, our nervous system response to get more adrenaline, to get more focused. If we are not doing it consciously, which is all too common, it's because we're, feeling like we need to show ourselves in a certain way, or we are forcing something else inside of us, or we have constriction, maybe posturally, if we're slumped and our diaphragm can't move, and we're needing to move the ribs to create that vacuum. Other muscles are doing that for us. So a lot of that forced breathing comes from the architecture and what we have access to. Or if we are over breathing because of an emotional response, but it's not a metabolic need for cellular respiration. Does that answer the question?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? I'd love to hear if you did like one of those practices the best. And I would invite you to be inspired to play with one of those on your own. Today was an introductory primer for Yoel's new well-being program on the biochemistry of breath, mastering breath for stress relief. And we're going to be officially launching it at the end of this month, both in a 4 by 45-minute cohort-based version and a single session 120-minute workshop. And so if you're interested to bring this to your company or your team or to learn more, please reach out to us. I think you'll get the link in the chat or respond to one of the emails that you got for this event. And we're also going to be sending a survey for your feedback today, so we'd love to hear that. And I hope you can find some awe and some support in your breath. Bye,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm glad, Jeff. I'm glad you liked a
It
lot.
was great. Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
It was.
Really
You're welcome.
enjoyed it.
Enjoyed it a lot.
Great. What was your favorite practice?
I like the first one just to slow me down. I'm in the middle of the day and I've had too much caffeine. Just to set the pace here, get me into the, set for the rest of the session there. So that to me was a great opening.
Yeah, I feel like in general, our world could use those the
Oh,
most.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so simple.
Thank you.
Yes,
Take care.
Thank you.
you too.
Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend, everyone.